Hi class, this is a video on how to write data to a file in Python. We have been writing to the console all up to this point in the semester. Well, we're going to shift that now. We're going to add another tool in our toolkit to be able to write to a file. So this way we could either have output going to the console that we're used to, or to the file, or to both. We can route them both ways. There are some good advantages to writing data to a file. One is that your output is preserved. Another is that you may need to write a program that's going to create some type of a database that might be needed for some other processing later. And matter of fact, you've got some labs in your program this week is going to support that. So plenty of opportunities will abound for writing to a file. Again, the two large reasons are, let's store that data somewhere convenient, or we can simply create some kind of a database. So there's a process for doing so. The first thing is we will always want to get into the habit of creating a string that stores the file name. You know, something like this: file name equals, how about output.txt? That's a reasonable file name. And the reason that we want to tend to store the file name as a string is because perhaps later we want to output where the file or where the data went. So we would want to output the actual file name as part of our output. Maybe we are going to allow the user to customize what file name they want. And the only way to do this, of course, is to store that into a text or into a variable. So that's why we generally will use that practice of just store it in a string. So that takes care of that. The next step then is to create what's called a file object. Now we do that by simply calling it a variable name. It follows the same rules as a variable. The most popular ones and the very common ones, and these are the ones that I want you to use in this class, are just simply going to be in file and out file. So we could use in file to read from a file, or simply out file to output to a file. And since this video is on writing data or outputting to a file, we'll use out file. So, out file, we'll just declare it. It's just going to be like a normal object or a variable. We're just going to happen to bind it to the file name. So what we do there is we'll just say out file equals, and then we'll call a method that's part of the standard Python library, and it's the file open method. And that's just simply open. And then we put the file name here, and then the access mode there. Now, since we already have file name stored as a string, well, we're good to go here. That's literally putting the string variable name in there. And the only thing left is what our access mode is going to be. Now, there's three. Writing is, of course, going to be a W for writing. There's also going to be, as we'll see in the next video, a read mode. So that's going to be lowercase r. And then there's also an append mode that does both reading and writing. So for here, writing data to a file, we're just going to pick W because that's going to be our simplest. And this then sets up the output file object, and it sets us up for using the necessary methods to get that data to a file. Okay, that's taken care of. Now the third step is just, we're going to use the .write method as often as we need. So what we'll do for that is, let's say we have a single value. Let's call it val, okay? Val equals 1986. And if we want to write this value to a file, we first call the output object, outfile. And then we call the .write method for it. And then we put simply the value, okay? Like that. However, there are some rules with reading and writing data to a file. first of all, anything that we write to a file has to be of string data type. And right now, val in our code is an integer as 1986. So before we write anything, we will need to make sure that everything we're trying to write to this file is all converted to strings. So, you might remember how to do that. Let's say if we had val here, if we just do str and then gave val as an argument, that's going to do the data conversion of val to a string. Just like if we had a string called strn2 and we wanted to convert that to an integer, you remember that we would do int and then strn2 or float strn2. These are the data type conversion methods, or the way to cast, in other words. So we need to cast val as a string. So let's just take care of that with str in front of it, and then we'll put val in parentheses like that. And then the next thing that we have to do, and this is just a little idiosyncrasy, about Python, but when we write that value as a string to the file, it's just going to output exactly those numbers. Like if here's our file over here, it's going to print a 1, a 9, an 8, and a 6. And the write head, or the exact place where the writing is going to happen, is just going to advance to the next character over after 1986. So this means if we do another write operation, it's just going to start right here. Let's say that number we need to write is 2000. Well, it's going to be right there, and that data now is meaningless because it's garbled. What we have to do is enter 1986 like this, but then we also have to write in the new line character, or the enter character, or the carriage return line feed character. There's a lot of names for it. I'll call it the new line character because it's going to then put a return at the end and put the write head all the way back to the beginning. So it's right here this time, and we're ready then for the next number to be written. So the way we do that is, we use, you remember when we did some string appending, you can concatenate strings together. You can take a string here and a string here and put the plus sign in the middle, and it concatenates them. We'll follow that same thing here. Since we've got a string, we'll just concatenate or append the new line character to the end of it. And that's just going to be the plus sign. And then we'll have \n in single quotes. And this is going to be everything that we needed. It's going to take the value, and I'll do it in green now, 1986. It's going to make a string out of it. So now this is a string data type and not an integer. And then it's going to put the \n character here. And this entire thing now gets written up here, and we get 1986 and a return. And the write head now is perfectly positioned for the next type of a write operation. So let's go and dabble with some code now. Hang on, and let me set up our Jupyter Notebook and get that going. Okay, we're here in Jupyter Notebook now, and let's kind of retrace our steps and get this process started to where we want to just write some data to a file. Okay, let's see here. I've got a main definitions crafted, and then I call main. So we're ready to go. Let's do some declarations here. And one of the first things that we have to do, if we remember those steps, is create a file name. So here I will just simply call this output.txt. Nice and easy. Make your output names, your file names, of course, very descriptive of the contents that they hold. So output is good, numbers is good, values, all of that stuff is good. The next thing we do is we have to create that file object called out file. Since we're going to write to a file, this will be out file. And if you remember the syntax for that, we're just going to call open. And open will take two arguments, the file name itself, and then the mode that we're going to access that file, either read, write, or append. And in our case, we're going to be writing, okay? Now let's do some file operations. I'll create, how about a value of 26152, and that's the value that we want to write to our file. No problem. We can do that with outfile.write, and then we're going to put value in here. Now, remember, before we try and run this, this will generate an error because we've got a data type mismatch here. Remember that value is an integer here, but we have to convert it to a string. So let's cast it to a string. With that code there, we'll just envelope string str around the value in parentheses, no problems. But then also remember, we have to append that new line character as part of this write operation. So inside these parentheses, we'll just add that new line character like this. We'll use the plus sign, which is the string concatenation operator, and we'll just append that new line character right at the very end of value. So if we run this now, it'll work fine. But before we do that, let's do some housekeeping here. And as you saw on the whiteboard there, that which is open must be closed. So here we did open the outfile file object. And since we're done now with the operations, we're ready to close it. So you've got to close it. Sometimes various compilers and interpreters will complain if it's not closed. And sometimes the write operation won't complete until the file is closed. So remember that. Hey, there's my dog. There's Pepper. Hey, Pepper. So let's take a look at this now and let's run it. And it looks like everything ran just fine here. But of course, we got no output, and that's expected because we didn't tell it to output anything to the console. So what happens here, and this is one of the rules with when you write a file, okay, is if the file doesn't exist, well, then the Python interpreter is going to create one for you. And isn't that convenient? If it does exist, it's going to just overwrite that file. Okay, so those are the two rules to remember. Again, if the file doesn't exist, the interpreter will create one for you as a courtesy. If it does exist, it's going to overwrite. So now this particular file, output.txt, that is going to reside in the exact same folder as your Jupyter notebook here. So wherever Sandbox is, in that same folder is going to be where output.txt is. So this happens just to be my comp sci 140 folder. If I go back to the Jupyter notebook listing here, maybe let's do a refresh. Let's see, I'll sort it by the last modified. And here I see my output.txt file. I'm going to go ahead and click on that to open it. Hey, and there's our number, 26152. I'm going to actually move this tab over here so we can see the output change kind of live as we go. So hopefully you are able to see both of my browsers now. All right, let's say we want to change this to something else, 16,000. All right, let's run that. And then just to prove to you that this file over here is being overwritten, let's hit the refresh button. And you'll see now that it's 16000. So it changed it. And it changed it through overwriting, okay, overwriting. Now we could append. Now, let's change this mode here to append. And what that is going to do is it's not going to overwrite the file if the file exists. Instead, it's going to just start writing at the end of the file. So let's see what happens here if I suddenly change these. I'm just going to create some kind of dummy numbers here, and I'm going to run it here. I'm running it again. Here, I'm going to run it again. And let's go back now to our output file. And we see that all of those numbers made it. Every time I ran the program over here, it updated the output file by appending those numbers rather than overwriting the numbers. So that kind of shows you what A will do for us. Now, in this case, we are going to overwrite. So I'm going to go back here to mode W for writing. And let's take a look now at how we could use a loop to perhaps write some values, multiple values to our file here. So let me get that code set up and I'll be right back with you. Okay, here is some code that's just going to write 10 somewhat random integers to a file. Here we have the same file name declared output.txt, and we have the same file object declared. And note that we are in write mode. And here is a value. And for our operations here, I am going to import random. For our operations here, we'll do a for loop going 10 times. The first thing that we'll do is write the value of the variable value to the file. And then here, I'm just going to pick a random integer between -3000 and 3000 and add it to value just to kind of mix it up, just to kind of show it a way to do that. Sure, we could just call random, but then this will create a new number value that then gets at the top of the next loop, will get overwritten or written to the file, and then we generate another one. So, we can run this. And over here then in our output file, I'm going to refresh it. And there's all the numbers that it created using this sort of sequence for that. Let's say we didn't want to do a random number. Let's say we wanted the user to enter some kind of a number. Let me throw up some code and show you how we would do that. Maybe the user's entering a whole bunch of data, or maybe some parts of a record. Here's some code now that's going to do what we were shooting for, which is to try and have the user enter some data that then gets written to the file, and we do that in a loop. So here we have the same setup. Here, our for loop is just going to run 3 times. Here we just have a simple prompt, enter data, number, whatever, and it's going to convert that input to an integer. And this is a cool trick. If you want to really customize that input prompt, you can use an F string in it, and that will let you then put in this syntax here to inject some variable, probably your for loop index of I. You can use that to output. And then here is our outfile.write call, and it's the exact same thing. We're just going to take entry here. We're going to write that to the file, and we're going to do the 2-step process to make that happen. First, convert it to a string, and second, append the new line character to it. So let's run this now, and I see that we're getting some prompts here. I'll enter the first piece of data, the second piece of data, and the third piece of data, and then our program's done because we just ran it 3 times. Now, if you recall, I do have my output.txt file open over here in the other window. So I'm just going to refresh it, and you can see that all of the values that we entered are now part of that output file. So our output was successful. Let's change this just for grins to append mode. And if we recall, if we run this program again, the previous data is going to be preserved and not overwritten. So let's do it again. And this time I'll do some 4-digit numbers just to show that there's a difference. Okay, the program finished executing. Let's go refresh our output file over here. And you can see the 3 original values that we put in. And here are the 3 new ones from the most recent program run. I'll change that back to W just to restore this All right, so I hope this helps explain how to both write to a file and then also how to use a loop when you want to do some type of a file operation dealing with either writing or appending. All right, thanks everybody.